And welcome back. And our scientist, Ann Morrison, is here. We hope to get Professor McCanny. And Ann, you have been working, as usual, even harder than ever. You've got so many top stories that need to be dealt with. Let's rock and roll. I think one of the worst things that's happening is the amount of seismic activity around the planet and the evolution of viruses. Lots of bad news. I mean, it really is pretty crazy stuff. And as you roll these all out, you have to realize we are looking at end-time birth-pang plagues. This is not just a warm-up. This is really nasty. The earthquake in Nepal, the earthquake activity and seismic activity around the planet, the spread of viruses is literally more than double since last year. In animals and so on, the spread literally of a plague actually from a Rottweiler in Colorado to 4 or 5 adult individuals, spread of avian and other viruses, flu viruses, to millions of birds in America that are already sacrificed and put down because of it. Things are pretty nuts, and I'd like you to go through the catalog of all the things you discovered and the stories that are happening this week.
Well, I think the uptick in seismic activity is extremely important. You know, we had been following the migration of the magnetic North Pole from the border between Alaska and Canada, and it had migrated over the pole and is now approaching Siberia. So it's on the other side of the world right now. And that is an indication that there is seismic activity that is going to be promoted just by that alone. And we have seen a tremendous upsurge in the number of volcanoes. Some of these volcanoes that are erupting at this time haven't erupted for 40 or 50 or 60 years. In fact, they were considered inactive. They weren't even on the watch list. So we have, they just found this week, they finally put a sensor down on the Juan de Fuca plate. Now, the Juan de Fuca plate is a subplate off the Pacific plate. And what happens is that when the Pacific tectonic plate is pressing against the North American plate along the northwest coast of the United States, what happens is if it can't make that subduction happen, sometimes you get an earthquake, but sometimes what happens is a piece of the tectonic plate will break off. Actually, it'll crack, and so then the Pacific plate will be pushing against this new plate, which we call the Juan de Fuca plate. And when it pushes against it, what happens is that it causes a ridge, and along that ridge there'll be a range of mountains form. So they've been watching this for for a long time, for the last 50 years, but they didn't have any equipment down there to look at it. And what they've discovered, they finally put some equipment down there so that they could look at it, and they have had a tremendous flow of magma towards the Pacific Northwest underneath the Pacific Ocean tectonic plate. And in fact, you can see its action clear out in Hawaii. The Pacific tectonic plate is the oldest tectonic plate that we know of, and that's why it's so deep, is because the other plates were built on top of it from magma that came up through it and sat on top of the Pacific tectonic plate. And I don't know if you've seen the pictures, but that Hawaiian volcano has been erupting for 20 or 30 years, and it's really putting on a show. I mean, it's dumping lava into the ocean at Hawaii. Well, they finally did put some sensors along the Juan de Fuca plate, and what do you know? They have discovered that there's a tremendous flow of magma under the Juan de Fuca plate, which means that there's a lot of pressure there to build mountains, to bring the magma up from underneath the Pacific Ocean tectonic plate, and that's what they're seeing there. Now, nobody had done that before because, well, it's very expensive to do that, and they didn't think it was worthwhile. We have been also seeing a hot zone in the Gulf of Alaska, and there is no explanation for it. We might reasonably expect that there is magma, that there is an undersea volcano that's called a seamount.
Right.
Like
Right.
is at the Juan de Fuca plate, that there's a seamount in the Gulf of Alaska that is trying to erupt.
Well, the interoceanic ridge, which is 22,000 miles long, it's like a zipper on the bottom of the oceans, where the magma rises and it flows out and then eventually dies underneath the continental shelf of every continent on Earth. The interoceanic cleft is 22,000 miles long, and it's an entire volcanic ridge. It's a type of there's different kinds of volcanoes. There's mud volcanoes, there's the interoceanic ridge, and there's the regular volcanoes that you see like on land, like Mount Hood, and volcanic, things like the regular volcanoes you see in Ethiopia or Eritrea, including calderas like the one up in the park up there we call Yellowstone, which is one of the largest calderas. The other largest caldera is up in Ethiopia. I'm going to explain some physics here, and if you're a physics person, I'm going to explain things that you may not have been taught in school. This is Tier 1 science. It's not Tier 2. Our universe is created and has multi-dimensions. The first 5 dimensions are the space, which is 3 dimensions, space-time, which Einstein described in the special and general theories of relativity, which is connected space-time, and the 5th dimension, and this is related to CERN, because I've had a lot of people asking me questions about what CERN is doing. They're researching what's called the Higgs field, and the Higgs field is tied directly to dark matter and dark energy, and time-space is embedded in the Higgs field. Now, the best way to think of the Higgs field is that in terms of regular energetics and plasma physics and photons, that the limiting speed of the 4th dimension is the speed of light. But that's not the fastest thing in the universe. When you go to what's called warp speed, like Star Trek, you're talking about what's called the 5th dimension, which is the Higgs field, and gravity waves actually travel faster than the speed of light. That's interesting, isn't it? They also have different frequencies. If the frequency, when the Earth is hit differentially by a gravity wave, it has a differential effect on the crust of the Earth, of the lithosphere and the deeper mantle, as well as the inner core and the outer core, which is liquid, because that creates the plasma field, because the Earth is basically a nuclear reactor, and as these cores rotate, they strip electrons and create a plasma field that surrounds the Earth in 5 layers. The first layer is the lithosphere, the second is the tropospheric ionosphere, which regulates weather, and it's integrated and linked with 3 other layers in the upper atmosphere called the Van Allen radiation belt to go to 22,000 miles. There's a linkage with the solar winds and the solar activity of the plasma in the cosmos. So our weather isn't just driven by heating the air. The old theory was that the oceans are heating up, and this is the foolishness of the global warming garbage, that somehow weather is driven by heating the oceans, the water rises and it creates weather. No. Weather is created by plasma physics, period, and it's integrated and directly connected to the sun and the movement of the planets and the solar activity and the plasma activity of the galaxy. Plasma activity regulates not only the deep trenches of the Earth, so when you have Fukushima Daiichi, heavy isotopes are changing the plasma physics and the energetics of the deep trenches that are connected to the second layer from the lithosphere, which is the tropospheric ionic layer. Now what's happening is the globalists are using a thing called torsion field gravity wave imaging, and they've been doing this since the early 1950s and 60s when Tier 1 science discovered with satellites they could image under oceanic submarines. So we've been able actually since the mid-60s to image Russian submarines at the deepest portion of the oceans by looking at their effect on the gravity waves around them. Okay? So they can image the gravity waves. And that gravity wave has a signature that can tell you what kind of submarine they're actually putting under the oceans. They can actually see through the Earth using gravity waves as well. Now, what the difference is, they're also looking out into deep space, and they see a gravity wave. It indicates a large object is returning. It's been pushing in hyperelliptical comets into our solar system, and some of these are very large, as Professor McCanney says. We're talking about comets the size of Venus, not little ones, and small ones, debris, asteroids. And again, there's a crossover between comets and asteroids. It's not as defined as people think. There's objects that are in between. What's approaching is an object that's been known since ancient times called the Destroyer Herculebus, a red or dwarf star, and there's 10,000 estimated red or brown dwarf stars for every star in our galaxy of 200 plus billion. So 10,000 times more. Only 10% are entrained in an orbital pattern, the rest are actually floating free and moving across the cosmos. So, Ann, let's continue with after my little discussion about what gravity waves do. CERN is actually trying to discover what's called star power, which goes beyond just nuclear fusion with helium-3, which, by the way, the Chinese have now announced what I've been saying for years, which is helium-3 has been mined on the moon since 5 years before the Eagle landed on the moon. when people say, "Oh, we never went to the moon," that's another foolish thing. We have, of course, not only been to the moon, but we have entire fleets between here and Mars, as the director of Space Command told me in March, basically in July 10th, 1994, when I got my Q-level security clearance, which is the same as the president at Space Command. Schriever Air Force Base, we took care of their employees doing all kinds of very classified projects. He said we control every cubic centimeter of space between here and Mars, and we've had a colony on Mars since 1982 and did find signs of human habitation and ancient, if you want to call it, archaeological places on Mars that were present that are very, very, very old. People need to understand that the nature of the universe, as they've been told, is completely false. But by the way, every single thing about the nature of our universe agrees 100% if you know how to interpret and understand the Bible. It's all there, believe it or not, including the 200 that landed, that were the Nephilim that brought down technology and transferred to mankind, about the Daniel prophecy of they shall mingle themselves with the seed in Hebrew of men. We're talking about the both the physical and the genetic and spiritual seed. About how our overlords are basically people that are called humans, which in Welsh means serpent men. So when we look at all these news, let's go through some of them, and hopefully we can connect with Professor McCanny, because I asked him some neat things about astrophysics and gravity waves, and he's got a brilliant ability to analyze this, and he's actually published a book on it, he told me, that explains why, Planet X, etc., which really is a dwarf star, or we call a comet, which can be planet-sized like Venus. So let's go to some of the news. It's pretty. If you don't know, have a relationship with God, this is beyond scary. I don't even know of a word for it, what's going on in terms of everything from Ebola to, a woman now getting it from sexually transmitted disease to, the plague spreading from a Rottweiler in Colorado. I mean, this is nuts, isn't it?
It is, I am so surprised by the uptick in seismic activity, although I shouldn't have been, because of the migration of the North Magnetic Pole. And I just think that with the decline in the number of species, we're having a problem with species die-off. And when that's happened before, usually what that means is that there's something changing in the orientation of the planet. The species can't adapt that fast. I mean, men can't adapt. But
what we're having is a combination. It's a convergence of things, what you're saying. In other words, we have a decrease of 5% per decade of the magnetosphere, which is quantitatively accurate. It's not a theory. We have a decrease in the world's oxygen concentration because 20% of the oxygen is generated in the Amazon rainforest, and the other 80% is generated in the upper 30 feet or 10 meters of the benthic layer of the oceans. And we're killing the oceans. We have 20,000 dead zones in the oceans, some of them as large as 200,000 square miles or larger. What's going on since they kill, for example, the Gulf of Mexico, and it's not coming back like people think. That's why we still have crayfish and so on, and other filter feeders that actually have no eyes or are still mutant because they're still using Corexit 9500. What people need to understand is that literally omnicide is a systematic thing, including bioengineering. We've got stacked vaccines, GMO food, depleted soil, 10,000 biotoxins of parts per million or higher, and 7 new ones every day hitting the biosphere. And we wonder why autism rates have gone from 1 in 3,600 when I went into medical school 42 years ago to now 1 in 24 people in some cities now, and the average across the U.S. is 1 in 68. What's going on is omnicide. And the collapse of the biosphere along the Pacific Ocean is just the first phase of a global omnicide, killing the rainforests, which are the second largest in the world, along from Alaska, British Columbia to Northern California. Yes. What's happening is we're moving toward a time when literally the Earth is going to be judged by fire. And I know people don't want to hear this, and this is why we may be, quote, hated for telling them the truth. But the reason is our world is under judgment. Our world is under judgment just like a world of the time of Noah, when he was told the world was under judgment because of the genetic mixing. We are doing all kinds of genetic horror experiments in Beijing, China. They have an underground facility where they literally have the capacity to grow hundreds of thousands of fetuses with artificial uteri to create super soldiers or a new genetic super race in China. There's the most advanced research is going on, believe it or not, in Japan. We have research facilities like George Washington University and the University in Palma, Italy, going back as early as the early 70s, doing work on artificial uteri. So Let me tell you, I prayed and I asked God for an answer as to how angry God is over the fact that human beings are mixing the races like the book of Jasher. And the answer I got is like taking a needle and poking the creator God of the universe in the eye with a needle. That's how angry it makes God.
Well, God set up the world according to His plan. It's God's natural order of things, and
right.
we're thinking that we can be God, that we can just do what we like now, instead of recognizing that He set up the natural order of the world. And
right.
I would say so. I would say that we are shaking our fists at our Creator.
You got a long list here. I want you to go through this list here, because when I looked at your list, my tongue fell out, and I go, wow. And a lot of research. So go through their list of updated as of May 1st. This news list is like, my gosh, are we in trouble?
Well, I want to jump to the bottom part of that list, and if you scroll to the bottom of that, you're going to see that we have a drought not only in California but also in the northwest of the United States, Washington State, Oregon, and Idaho. And now the Air Force has said we're not interested in using the America's model for weather. For weather prediction anymore. We're going to use the unified model of the United Kingdom Met Office, and they just like it more because they can get both short and longer range forecasts over large and small areas, and it's a more seamless operation. And I have to tell you that when the American models for weather were set up, they were told, the meteorologists were told, to cut them off at the borders of the United States. And if you watch some of the local weathercasts, you'll see that they won't have anything in Canada or in Mexico or the Pacific Ocean or the Atlantic Ocean. It's just all within the borders of the United States. Well, when you do that, when you build a model like that, you get edge effects. So that means that they're not accurate at the edges. Well, what is that? That's the West Coast and the East Coast. Well, that happens to be very important because that's where most of the people live. So the Air Force is going to use the Met Office, and they said, well, they'll continue to use the American models too. If you scroll down, though, what I really want to talk about is the Columbia River at Vancouver. And I have a graph there that shows that the Columbia River is almost at a low stage. Now, hydroelectric power is very important in the Pacific Northwest, and it doesn't work when you're at the low stage of the river.
Another catastrophic result. Wow. We're having technical details. I have a feeling that the powers that be don't want Professor McCanney and Dr. Deagle and Ann Morrison to interact. The dangerous trio pulling out news items, and I want to run through a few of them and get you to kind of reflect on each one in your list that you sent me. Researchers develop Ebola treatment effective 3 days after infection. Ebola lying in wait. Ebola researchers take new look at risk of sexual transmission. Ebola virus Makona, EBOV/MAK. Ebola virus, Indiana HIV outbreak, hepatitis C epidemic sparks CDC alert. In China, HPA1 H5N6 has been found to cause human clinical cases. Minnesota declares state of emergency over bird flu in poultry. They've already killed, by the way, 7.3 million plus birds. Additional background high pathogenic avian influenza. Seismic activity we've talked about all over the planet. This means gravity waves from a deep space object. The globalists, by the way, are running around trying to cause World War III, trying to cause plagues, trying to cause drought, trying to actually push forward the evolution, including plausible, deniable genetic engineering, trying to sterilize the population like these HCG vaccines they found with the Catholic Doctors Association in Kenya last month. What people need to realize, we are deep in the end times. This is not maybe in the future, oh my gosh, I hope it doesn't happen in our lifetime. It's happening right now. I can't tell you how fast it's going to evolve. I can tell you, though, that we have just had, with Passover, the third blood moon of the tetrad, and the fourth one comes up with a 2 weeks before supermoon solar eclipse over Jerusalem, and what's called a supermoon, blood moon, which is going to occur on Passover this fall. I believe that this is what's called the end of a Shemitah year, and I said the Shemitah has hit the fan. If you look at the blood moon signs, what I believe is happening, and these are signs, by the way, that Moses knew when he could see signs in heaven. He was both an astronomer, a physician, a scientist, and he knew about the ancient signs of the return of the destroyer, which is in Cartouches in ancient Egypt. We're seeing gravity waves, and the globalists know this. They're scrambling around ready to cause worldwide plagues, cause war, cause economic devastation, sterilize the population, dumb us down, so we won't interfere with their escape to their underground, quote, hotels while the earth fries. That's where things are going. And people say, no, Dr. Daigle, it's not that bad. We're heading toward a judgment of fire. It's in the Bible. If you believe Jesus, you believe what Jesus said, and the Bible says, we are heading toward a judgment of fire. You may not like that, but guess what? Like the fourth man in the fire, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, if we are God's chosen people and we listen and do His will, Shema, then God will protect us. He'll bring us to safe cities. He'll tell us what technology to use. He'll give us words of knowledge, but He won't be able to protect those who just, quote, hide themselves in the rocks and the deep places of the earth, such as in Revelation 6 that the globalists and satanic maniacs want to do, that say, hey, I have 2 reserved seats in the underground city like Willy Wonka's chocolate factory. No, you don't have those, because you're not going to hide yourself from the face of the Holy One. All this news is not only catastrophic, it is apocalyptic. Can you give me some more news items, Ann, before we pop over to some of the other sites?
Well, I think that we've got our eyes we've got our eyes open, and we know, for instance, that this uptick, I mean, it's not an uptick, it's a surge in seismic activity is, it's just not part of God's natural law. I mean, something is making it more active than it was before, and certainly that can be God. I mean, God can do that. There's nothing to stop Him from doing that. The migration of the North Magnetic Pole is, I mean, it is so highly unusual that that some of the geologists and the people that watch that, they're calling it that we're in chaos. You know, in other words, the North Magnetic Pole has migrated across the North Pole and is now in Asia instead of on the North American continent. And therefore, because it traveled so fast, we know that probably the core of the Earth has turned. And when the core of the Earth turns, well, that means that we're going to have disasters on the surface of the Earth. I mean, you can't have the core turning without it dragging along with it the magma, the lithosphere, and the crust, which we live on. And that seems to be happening. I mean, these are just, all you have to do is make an observation and then say, oh, well, I guess it's right that we should be having seismic activity now. Now, God knows all of this. I mean, He knows that when the magnetic North Pole migrates, that the Earth is going to be in turmoil and the magma is going to be. I mean, we have so many more volcanoes right now than we had even a week ago. That things are happening very fast geologically.
Right, exactly. Now, one of the things that I discovered when I started taking care of employees at U.S. Space Command is that since the 1950s and definitely by the mid-60s, we had torsion field imaging so we could see through the Earth. And then what they discovered is that there were these giant pockmarks. They thought, well, are these ancient craters that filled in? No. They were actually ancient volcanic dormant magma domes that when the lithosphere, the crust of the Earth, moved over these hot spots, they no longer were being fed, so they became dormant. And over hundreds of thousands and millions of years, what's happened is there's many of these all over the planet, and they're the ideal city for underground cities to be built. The second are matrix cities where they use tunneling machines. The current ones can do up to 140 foot across the tunneling surface. And they're not using a tunnel-type tunnel where it cuts it with a blade. It is impact lasers using sodium-cooled impact lasers, and they blow the debris on the sidewalls for zero debris maglev tunnels. And these tunnels are cutting through the rock at a rate, depending on the material, up to 14 miles per day. Now, by the mid-90s, we're around 7 miles plus per day. When Phil Schneider and John Fiala were working with the tunneling machines for I'm trying to remember the name of the company now. In fact, it was Bechtel. Believe it or not, Bechtel Corporation is the primary one funding the underground tunneling machines. Did you know that? Bechtel Corp?
No. I've
Isn't
never
that
had much to
interesting?
do with them.
Yeah, I know so much about this stuff that someday I'll do a data dump on. As I say, I already overwhelm a lot of people anyway, but the fact is that there is not a human being on this planet or has ever lived that knows more about the mark of the beast technically and spiritually than I do. And I'm not boasting that because God made me this way so that I would have a radio program today and tell you judgment's coming on this nation. And this nation that are smarten up. The only person I see is a ballot candidate, and we need to also steer him so he presents himself properly and we have a bit in his mouth, is Dr. Rand Paul. The only one with a foreign policy, pro-life attitude, getting rid of Obamacare, dealing with all these issues is Dr. Rand Paul. And what's happening now, if you look at all the news, all the way from what's going on in Nepal to Boko Haram and Nigeria to Pope Francis, which is the anti-pope. I mean, you have to look at this, and if you read your Bible, you say, I'm cross-checking my notes in the Bible here, and this does not look good. And we believers, I mean, we as it says, when you see these things, it says in the Bible, the regular kind of, I call it the Laodicean church and the regular public, men's hearts will fail and women for fear of what is coming upon the earth. For us Christians, we should have, it says, lift up your hearts for your redemption. The redemption of the planet, redemption of us as a people, and redemption of the human race is coming. God's redemption is coming, but he's going to show up not just in the skies, he's going to show up in people's hearts, as I say, and this is a simple principle I mentioned. Carl Gallups has been a pastor for 35 years. Simple principles work. When I'm teaching my daughter with Down syndrome 22, heaven starts today when you serve God, and hell becomes evident when the body drops away. And when people are expecting a rapture, forget it. As I said to one lady in Dallas, this is not Dr. Bill's attitude or opinion, it's a thus saith the Lord. If you're unlucky enough to live in Dallas when 5 nuclear weapons from the former Soviet Union, now Russia, land and destroy your city and you disappear in an atomic vapor, and you say, hello, Jesus, that's the rapture. If you disagree with me, you're going to be in considerable trouble and distress when you look up and see the bones in your hand for the last time when the bombs drop, because of the things we're doing with the world are moving us toward a thermonuclear biological scalar and annihilation at a very fast pace. And you had some good questions. Let's repeat those for our audience. By the way, if you're out there and you want to hear more about CERN or these gravity waves, all I can tell you is the signs to watch are here on the earth. Before Obama leaves, he wants to partition the state of Israel and the city of Jerusalem. The first sign to watch that's going to be very serious, we have the first cracks of it, was the Iranians seizing cargo ships in the Strait of Hormuz. All they need to do is make a phone call to Lloyd's of London and the traffic will stop. That's the first phase of what I call the birth pangs before the tribulation, which will mean there'll be a false peace treaty signed, the partitioning of the city of Jerusalem, the state of Israel. It'll be the setting up of a new caliphate over all the Islamic nations, which the Americans and the multinationals want to do. And these birth pangs, which we now are entering after 7 lean years, 7 years of relative, what we call, abundance. Since 2008, we're now moving to another 7 years that are going to be the 7 lean years, the times of Joseph, which are prophesied over the state of Israel, state of Egypt, which are going to strike the planet, because right now we're moving into massive global famine. This geoengineering of the Earth's climate.
Hello? Yes. Well, what we were talking about in the break was the rotation of the North American plate. Now they've mapped it, and they can do that because they have enough sensors in the ground now. And what they've discovered is that it's rotating counterclockwise in the northwestern corner of New Mexico. And so that means that the East Coast is going north.
And I think I'm back now. I think somehow the powers that be didn't want me speaking, I guess. So.
I guess not.
By the way, to give people an idea just how much of a prepper, I not only have high-speed 100 megabytes download and 20 megabytes upload, but I also have a 4G card constantly hooked up, so as soon as my internet drops, it goes to that. So the powers that be are cutting off the signal after it leaves my access machine here. So you have to understand the powers that be do not want what I'm going to say said. And when we have experts like yourself who are an excellent scientist, or Professor Kenny who's tried for 3 weeks to get on and his internet is blocked every time, you know they don't want the interaction, do they? So please continue.
Yeah, what I was saying was what we had talked about is that the rotation of the North American plate is counterclockwise, and the point is where it's rotating about is in northwestern New Mexico, and so that means that the seismic events and the volcanic events then are following that, and that's how they figure out where the rotation point is and how much it's moving. And so the east coast would be going north, and the west coast would be going south. Now, some people think that the whole North American continent will be moving south, but I'm not sure that that's true. But it does.
Let me describe the geography
of the Earth will try to. Yeah. The Earth will try to move the geographic North Pole over the magnetic North Pole. So we know that Siberia and Russia will be moving up into the Arctic Circle.
Right. Let me describe exactly what the map will look like in the future. This is after the events have stabilized. So new heavens and a new Earth. Firstly, you're right. There's going to be a rotation. There will actually be a separation of the middle of the continent. So the Mississippi River in places will be 200 miles across. And there'll be an open waterway all the way from the Gulf of Mexico to the Great Lakes. That North America will twist and rotate, but most of North America will move south 1,200 miles. And the equator will pass through Havana, Cuba. Most of northern Russia, Siberia, and the areas of the Kazakh areas of the steppes of northern China will have moved into the Arctic Circle. The city of Moscow, which is 2,000 miles directly north of the Temple Mount, will have moved basically 1,200 miles further north, which won't be a pleasant place to be if you're in Moscow. And Israel and the state of Israel will have moved up into a much more continental climate 1,200 miles further north, which would be up near quite a bit further, talking about 1,200 miles directly north of it. What's going to happen to the world climate is going to completely change. And the world is going through a kind of a spasm, like the birth pangs of a new world. There'll be the rising of land from the oceans, the areas of the northeast United States. You'll see new land arrive from the areas of the Bay of Fundy and around the Grand Banks, which is a giant area that's relatively shallow around Nova Scotia, Prince Edward Island, out toward Newfoundland, and out toward Iceland and Greenland. And what's going to happen in many other areas of the Earth are actually going to go under the water, just like ancient Atlantis. There were 3 falls of Atlantis. The last was the fall of the Minoans, which is actually a purposeful hiding of the fact that the fall of the Minoans, which are actually the last fall of Atlantis, at Santorini was an explosion of Thera, the supervolcano, that actually caused the destruction of the second kingdom of the Egyptians under the Pharaoh. So what people need to understand, this is a periodic, repeated cataclysm. The cycle is around 3,650 years. Moses knew about it because he was an ancient astronomer as well as a physician and scientist. And he was taught by the high priest, and they knew this was returning. It's all in the ancient written in Egypt and Sumer and around the Middle East. They're quite familiar and were aware of the high priests were the ancient scientists, or I call the Tier 1 scientists. And we have people like Professor McCanney, who's fully aware that we have returning large cometary objects and also dwarf stars that are entrained in orbit, and some are non-entrained, that travel around the cosmos, and they cause havoc. And the one that returns periodically is called Herculobus, or the Destroyer. People need to know it really is coming back in. I can't give you times and dates, but I can tell you the signs that with hyperelliptical comets over the last 5 years, the gravity waves with increased volcanism, as Jesus said in his discussion to his disciples, when shall these things be in the signs of the time of the end? He says there'll be earthquakes in diverse places, and all these other things he talked about. And massive object that is a dwarf star. Okay, I'm back. Can you hear me again, Ann?
Yes. Go ahead.
Yeah, they dropped me again. And by the way, on my end it says connected, so it dropped because the powers that be are saying, oh my God, we can't have Deagle saying all this stuff. And the reason why people say, now why can Deagle talk about things and high science, which by the way, if you're a tier 1 scientist and you're listening to this from DARPA or NSA or you're an astrophysicist like Professor McCanny, you'll say, my God, how does he know this stuff? And how does he still have a pulse? Haven't they killed him? And the reason is, if they kill me, you might believe. That's why I'm being repeatedly cut off here. Now, people need to understand, we are at the time of the end, and I know this irks people, especially it irks Christians, but I need people to understand this. I'm a physician, I have special skills, that's why I'm trying to write this book, Dr. You will be out by July 4th. It will change medicine and healing on the planet forever. Forever. When I wrote the book Clay and Iron and Abortion and Armageddon, I did not know anything. I didn't know where the book of Isaiah was. God dictated to me, literally audibly in my ear. 1988. And by 1992, I was praying and I asked God what to do. So he asked me to go to Israel with Pastor Williams. And before we got there, God actually gave me a vision that we're going to meet specific individuals. And we did. We actually left Tom Hess's house of prayer at the top of the Mount of Olives, and we went literally to a hotel in Israel and stayed there and prayed until Friday. God said, go back to Israel, to Jerusalem on Friday. We went there, and a guy came up to us and wanted bakshish, and when we didn't know what bakshish was, he pulled a knife. And a man came over to me and my wife, Michelle, and said, and to stop the guy from stabbing us, and he told him to get lost, because obviously he was a resident there. His name was Nicolas Saliba. God actually gave me his name before we went there 3 weeks before. And he was a stonemason for the Church of the Holy Sepulchre, so he brought us to places that not even the high priests in the Greek Orthodox faith of the Church of the Holy Sepulchre and the Russian Orthodox Church in the Mount, their sacred buildings. And he told me things that basically, even the stuff I put in clay, and people, as Daniel said, close up and seal the words of this book till the time of the end, and the time.
Well, thank you, Dr. Bill, and this will be Ann Morrison. My suggestion is that you dig fast, you dig deep.